Hey, I want to speak to you on the topic, I guess maybe the question, which kind are you? Which kind are you? So if you want to title a message, or if you want to, if you need notes or whatever, again, I'm not always the best at that, but which kind are you is the topic or the title of today's message. And I'll begin by talking about days of the week, because I don't know if you have a favorite day of the week. I think some people do, or a lot of people do, or maybe a majority of people have a favorite day of the week. If you don't, then you should join the majority and pick a favorite day of the week. One of my favorite days happens to be Sunday, and it's not always that way. For pretty much the majority of my adult life, I've worked in church, and so Sundays are like a work day. But Sundays can be a busy day, an exhausting day, a fatiguing day. But in this season of my life, Sundays really has become one of my favorite days because I get to hang out with you guys. And so I say that with sincerity, and I'm not just like blowing smoke, and hopefully some of you feel that same way about me, because that would be awkward if it was just kind of one-sided. But Sundays have become one of the highlights of my week. I love looking forward to Sundays and spending time in church and our community and the team and the different things that's going on through Meta Church. But then also for me, Sundays are kind of like a mixed bag emotionally. It's a mixed bag emotionally because you have the highlight of church in the morning, but then the reality of Monday in the afternoon. And so it kind of creates this bit of oh gosh, the weekend's ending. I'm not really, whether I'm ready or not doesn't matter because it's coming anyway. And so it's going to be here, and I have to figure out what to do with it. And part of the reason for me, Mondays are a bit at times stressful or a bit overwhelming is because I work in kind of a range of different things, and with several different, jobs. And so, of course, starting this church, but then I have some contract work that I do and content writing and marketing with a couple of companies. And then I work primarily as a consultant with churches and nonprofits and doing that. And I serve as the vice president technically of a company, which makes me sound really important and big. But all that to say, I do all that remote. And for all those things, along with the church stuff, I have to manage my own responsibilities. So coming into Monday morning, I have to think about what are all the things that I need to get done, and for who, who needs this and who needs that, and when do I get this done, and how do I take care of this? And so every Monday morning, it starts the same way. I take my list of to-do items, and then I have this app on my phone, and I start punching them in, and I type in all these different things. And if I have a lot, or I feel like I have a lot coming on, it kind of creeps into Sunday night where I'm you know what? I just need to clear my head. I need to put out my to-do list and start putting this stuff together. And with these different competing jobs, and maybe you may not have a bunch of jobs. You may just have one job, and that's fine. But you know the feeling of competing responsibilities, right? Where you have a bunch of things you got to get done, but then you don't know which order. If you're in school, it's the assignments and the projects and the work, or if you're managing any sort of kind of area of responsibility, it's figuring out which things do I get done and this and all that stuff. And so what you end up doing is or what I end up doing is that I kind of, once I go through my list, I start prioritizing my priorities, right? Because you have your list of everything that needs to get done, but then you look at it and you're I don't need to do that. I'll delegate that one and I'll pass it off to somebody else. But then you have these priorities that are at the top. And then when you have multiple priorities, you got to start figuring out, okay, which one is the top? But when you think about that, it actually doesn't make any sense. The literal definition of a priority is that which comes first, or that which is superior. So you can't have, you literally cannot have 5 priorities, because there's only, there's no way 5 things can be first. Only one thing can be first. But we fall into that trap of these competing priorities. And the weird thing is, I don't know, maybe I'm just weird, but when you start looking into why, how is this possible to have a word, priorities, that is a literal impossibility? And so I started researching the word history. This is months ago. And what I found was actually rather interesting. The word priorities is actually a word that's only about 80 years old. It's not that old. I don't know, English is my second language, you got to forgive me. I don't know how old English language is. I have no idea, the length of time that people have been speaking English as we know it, but I'm guessing it's a lot older than 80 years. And so, the span of time that we've been speaking this language called English, we've only been using the word priorities about 80 years. In fact, if you go back and kind of look through, there's this whole thing called an engram that I researched and read about and blah, blah, blah. But anyway, that's besides the point. If you research it, you realize that the word priorities just started kind of appearing in the 1940s. Not that long, kind of World War II time. And so, like, this word came about, and it's almost like it came about because there was a season or a point in history when we felt overwhelmed by everything we had to do, and so we stopped using priority as a singular word and made it a plural term to capture, like, everything that needed to get done. And so we created priorities. But in the problem, or I say in the solution of creating priorities, we've created another problem. Because inevitably, when you have multiple priorities, what you do is that what should be first gets brought down to the level of everything that you're saying is first. Or you've elevated some things that aren't really first, but you've made them first because of this flexibility that we've given or allotted in this word. And we don't just do that like in work. We actually do this in a lot of different areas of our lives, right? And it's not just something like we know. It's actually something that's taught and like valued. Like if you read business books or leadership books, you'll see like, all right, you got to have like your priorities. So write out like a 1A, a 1B, a 1C. Like there's like a, A1, A2, A3, and so on. And if it's on the C list, then you should never do it. Like all these things like, right? But it's like C could have like 30 different numbers underneath just the C category. And not only have we done this in work, but we've done this in religion and faith and in our relationship with Jesus. Like we've created this system of prioritizing things that matter most, the things that are, super important and things that we should do. We've created kind of multiple layers of like priority and precedent when it comes to a relationship with Jesus or following God. Right? Like if you think about a lot of what you hear about the Christian faith, it's like, okay, right, so I've got to go to church, like that's, boom, done that, check that box, I'm there. Okay, so I've got to like be a good person, be nice to my coworkers, if I can do anything within me to control myself, do not use a curse word. But like, okay, right, check, got that, good. Okay, so I know like, all right, don't smoke, don't drink, or if I drink, just don't tell anybody. And then definitely no sex before marriage, like, okay, boom, boom, boom. And we've like elevated all these things to like a high up priority. And I'm not saying any of those things are bad. I'm not saying any of those things are wrong. But we've created this level in which all of these things are of equal importance and equal significance and of equal priority. And in the process of doing so, we've actually diminished the thing that should matter most. Because when you boil down the Christian faith, when you break it down to what matters most, when you bring it down to the most important thing, Jesus said this. He said, you must love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. The second is equally important. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now notice what he says here. The entire law and all the demands of the prophets are based on these two commandments. The entire law. So he gives, in essence, two things, but really they're under the umbrella of one thing, which is to love. Yeah. Which is to love. Like everything you do falls in line or underneath this thing, this one thing of love. This is what Jesus said is the most important. This is what Jesus said is the most critical. And if you were to follow Jesus' ministry through the four Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, you would find that love has a significant and a massive emphasis throughout the whole of his ministry. In fact, this wasn't something Jesus just said, like, be all about the love. It wasn't like my t-shirt slogan that's like, all we need is love. But it was actually something he did. It was something that mattered to him. It was a way of living. It wasn't just a way of talking. And so Jesus was super clear about this, and this is something that was really significant. And so from this passage, or from these stories of Jesus' ministry, is where we come up with this whole live to love DNA that we'll talk about in a second. It's where we come up with this whole series of above all else. Because above all else, the call was to love. The call is to love, and the call will be to love. Right. Above all else. Because in a world of confusing priorities, we've taken some things in the Christian faith and we've elevated them to a level in which they're important, but they shouldn't be as important as what we've made them. Things like theology, right? Like, okay, what do you believe about God? How do you believe about God? We have this faith and this tradition and this denomination and this segmentation and then this variation or this adaptation, and it's like, all these things, it's not that theology is bad, but there are certain people and there are certain groups who have placed such an emphasis on theology, and they've elevated it to such a level that love has been diminished. We talk about moralism. right? Like a lot of like the Christian faith or a lot of like the Christian practice has become essentially behavior modification. Right. Do this, don't do this. This is what a good Christian does. This is what a bad Christian does. This is what a non-Christian does. And we've segmented and we've said this is what it means to follow Jesus. And so we've placed this heavy emphasis on moralism. And we've created and we've elevated this priority of moralism to the point where then love gets diminished. And then it's not just that, but then you go into like political ideologies. And it's like a Christian is this type of affiliation or a Christian is that type of affiliation. And you have people on both sides who are telling you what a Christian should be or how a Christian should vote or what should be their main emphasis. And you realize that all of a sudden this has become elevated to a high level of priority. And all of a sudden in the process of elevating political ideologies, we've diminished or reduced the role of love. And it's not just political ideologies. Of course, that bleeds over into social agendas. You know, what about this hot button issue? What about abortion? What about gay rights? What about, gun violence? What about Black Lives Matter? What about All Lives Matter? What about Police Lives Matter? What about all these different things? Wow. And we've elevated it. So you've got theology, you've got moralism, you've got political ideologies, you've got socialism, you've got all these, or social issues and all these things. And then what gets dropped or what gets reduced is love. Yet it seems to me that love would somehow be the answer in all of these things. Yeah. Like if we kept the main thing, some of these things could be reconciled. And doesn't mean we would agree because we'll get to that and all that stuff. But listen, this is how Jesus lived his life. And this is where we find Jesus in the passage today in Mark chapter 2. So if you have a Bible, you can turn there. I'll flip over on the screen as well. But Mark chapter 2 is where we'll begin reading in verse 13. And it says this, "Then Jesus went out to the lake shore again and taught the crowds that were coming to him. As he walked along, he saw Levi, son of Alphaeus, sitting at his tax collector's booth." Now, if you don't know, Levi goes by another name in some of the other accounts as Matthew. Okay, so Matthew was Levi, Levi was Matthew. He was a tax collector, and a tax collector was kind of a big deal. It was a big deal because this is kind of like he was a sellout. Okay, a tax collector was typically someone of Jewish or like Israeli ethnicity who had committed to work with the Roman government, who the Israelites felt like, or the Jewish people felt like they were intruding on their territory and occupying a land that didn't belong to them. But the tax collector decided, this is what I'm going to do. I can make some money. I can get paid from the Roman government by imposing taxes on the Jewish people. And typically a tax collector wouldn't just impose the taxes, but because he was the only one that knew what the tax rate was, he could adjust the variable rate to whatever he wanted to gain. So if the tax is 10%, he could charge you 20 just because you didn't know any different. So he was a sellout. He was selling out his own people for capital gain for his benefit, and then he became an allegiance or a partner with the Roman government. So this is who Levi is, okay? He's sitting at his tax collector's booth. He's in the middle of his day job where everyone walks by and is probably cursing at him and calling him a sellout. And so he says, Jesus speaking to him says, "Follow me and be my disciple. Be my disciple." So Levi got up and followed him. Later, Levi invited Jesus and his disciples to his home as dinner guests, along with many tax collectors and other disreputable sinners. Parenthetical thought, there were many people of this kind among Jesus' followers. But when the teachers of religious law, who were Pharisees, saw him eating with the tax collectors and the other sinners. So if you don't know who a Pharisee was basically a religious leader, someone who was kind of a student of the religious law, someone who went to school beyond the typical education to understand what God's word said and what God's word didn't say, and then they would create or develop other laws in addition to what God said to prevent you from falling into mistakes, to prevent you from doing something you shouldn't, or to require you to do something in addition or beyond what God had required himself. So these were like the cream of the crop, the people that like were at the top of their game when it came to believing in God or believing in faith and pursuing God. So it says when the Pharisees saw him eating with tax collectors and other sinners, they asked his disciples, "Why does he eat with such scum?" Jesus replies, when he heard this, he told them, "Healthy people don't need a doctor, sick people do. I have come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners." So Jesus says, listen, I'm gonna bring you a play on words. You may think something, but I don't care about what you think. I want to hang time with people who know. I want to spend time with the people who know their condition, who know who they are. And I love the parenthetical thought that Mark includes in verse 15 when he says, there were many people of this kind among Jesus' followers. Disreputable sinners, tax collectors, people who were sellouts, people who were tarnished, people who were referred to as scum. That there were many of those kind among Jesus' followers. And I can't help but read this passage and then have to ask myself the question, why? Right. Why? Like, why did that audience say, yeah, Jesus is the guy I want to hang around? Why, like, did those people feel like, yeah, I can chill with Jesus, I can kick it with Jesus? Like, what is it that was so compelling about Jesus? What is it that made them feel like, yeah, like, I know that guy and like, I can spend time with him and like, hey, there's a bunch of us that are with him. Not just like what made him so compelling, but what drew them in and what kept them there. Because look, we can be drawn into something, right? Like ladies, you might see a guy and you're like, oh yeah, I like him. And he'll draw you in with his looks and then you get to know him like, nope, he's dumb as rocks. Bye, Felicia, I'm out. Right? It's like, so he can draw you in, but he may not be able to keep you there. Yeah. So these people, what drew them into Jesus and why did they remain? Because when I look at Jesus' people today, I don't see this same kind of dynamic. I mean, there's some people, there's some of that kind in the church, but not many. You know, there's several people who are hung up on things. There's several people who have issues with things, but not multitudes. In fact, the multitudes and the many are actually outside of the church saying, no, I want nothing to do with Jesus or what I see or what I interpret as Jesus. So the question is why? Because again, and I guess to answer this question, maybe you have to go back and look at who these people were, right? Like they were outcast. They were people who were kind of like, at least for the most part from the religious crowd, like separated or banished or kind of like put on the outside. They weren't good enough and they weren't like qualified or they weren't like, you know, fitting enough for the religious standard. I mean, if you think about like what the religious people said about them, they said, why does he eat with such scum? Now, I legit, this week I was trying to think, like, when's the last time I used the word scum? Like about anything. Like scum. Like when have I called something like scum? And I really couldn't like think of that. And then I tried to think, like, take it a step further. Not just when have I thought about anything as scum, but when have I been willing to call somebody else scum? And like I really couldn't think of a time, like, or the last time that maybe I did that. And it's not because I'm perfect. Like if you ask me, hey, who's scummy? I'll probably write off a list of like, you know, like 5-6 names. But I mean, to actually call that person scum, you know, it's like my holy distinguishment right there. Like that's about as spiritual as I get. Like I may think it, but I don't say it. But these people had no problem saying it. They had no problem calling them scum. They were satisfied in that. And so these people were completely outcast and they were overlooked because they were scum. And not just they were overlooked, but then the Pharisees took it a step further and essentially like made it where Jesus was guilty by association. That because he associated with them, because he allowed them to be associated with him, that he must have been that type. He must have been one of those. He must have been that type of person that's okay with scum in his life. Because, I mean, why else would he hang out with scum? And you know, like, I don't know if you've ever been, like, accused of something or have been, like, labeled something or, you know, someone has made a judgment on you based off of an association. Accurate or inaccurate. Or someone has overlooked you or someone has outcast you because of what you've done or because of something that's happened in your past or you know, a bad season of life or a mistake you made or some issues you've struggled with or that you currently are struggling with. And so someone else on one side of the fence decided, you know what, I don't want to do anything, like I don't want to be connected to you because of what other people think about you or because of what I know about you. I don't know if you ever felt that way. It feels like we live in an age where we are so trigger happy to like, you know, just like, bam, like nail someone with something. Like it seems like any time that like someone comes from, like this is what I did this week. I don't know how big you are on social media, but this kid that's been yodeling all over the place. So I'm like, who is this kid? So I look him up and I'm like, like, what's the dirt? You know, I'm like trying to figure out, he's 11 years old, what crime has he committed, you know? Like, where has he been racist? You know, like, it's like that's the world we live in. Yeah. It's like, and that's like on the public light, but then on a personal level, we experience that as well. Yeah. It's not just like someone's trying to out you on social media, it's that the people you work with, the friends you have, the church community you've been a part of, like, they've been so quick to just find anything that, like, any sort of area where they can just kind of distinguish or separate themselves from you and disassociate to you because of an association or because of something you've done. And this is the exact same way these people felt. So again, I ask the question, why did they find it okay to be around Jesus? Like, what was it? And the answer, honestly, is just real simple. It's not much more complicated than that. Yeah. Acceptance. What Jesus was willing to offer was acceptance. Yeah. What the Pharisees, the religious crowd, the normal group, the normal type of people, Matthew wasn't accepted. The other tax collectors weren't accepted. The degenerate sinners weren't accepted. Disreputable people weren't accepted. Acceptance was the thing that Jesus offered that nobody else was willing to extend to them. And for whatever reasons, these people knew that with Jesus they would be welcomed, that they would be received, and that they would be encouraged. Yeah. And they recognized, hey, I might not have it together, but at least with this guy, he's going to help me move forward. He's going to help me. He's going to take me in, and he's going to help me, I might come into him, and I might not be the total package. But they were hopeful that when they were with Jesus, they could leave different. And it made a massive amount of difference in their lives. And Jesus understood this, that acceptance is the key that opens the door to love. Acceptance is the key that opens the door to love. There's not a situation, you see, Jesus knew that his love would lead to their transformation. But in order for them to experience his love, they first needed to feel like they would be accepted by him. And so he welcomed them into his fold. He welcomed them among his followers. And because when it comes to loving above all else, there is no love apart from acceptance. I mean, I dare you to think of a situation where you felt loved by someone who didn't accept you. You can't do it. You can't do it. In fact, when someone has said, hey, I love you, but you know they don't accept you, few things stir you up more than that. Like, you scoff at them, you get angry, you probably curse under your breath, like, you don't know love, you're like, I can't believe they said they love me, it throws you off. Why? Because they didn't accept you, or you felt unaccepted by them. And so you can't have love apart from acceptance. And as a church, one of our core DNA, as I said earlier, is live to love. And when we say that, this is what it means. We say the greatest measure of success in our lives is not a position we attain or a status we gain or an account we fill, but whether or not we live our lives loving others. In a city like New York, where all these things take priority, where all these things take precedent, in the Christian faith, where all these things matter. Oh, he's the pastor. Oh, look, he's a good Christian. His family's happy. Oh, look, they don't do anything bad. They've not been divorced. They waited till marriage, or they never questioned the Bible, or they never questioned what God said. All these things that we position and we esteem greater than love, it's just false. So as a church community, when we talk about DNA, when we talk about forging an identity, what we're talking about is this. This is the greatest measure of success in our lives. And if we're ever going to own this as an identity and live this out as a community, then the starting place absolutely has to be the place of acceptance. And I guess, because here's what happens, right? You're sinful. I'm probably a little bit more sinful than you are. And so, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt. But, here's what we do, right? But what about this? What about that situation? What about that person? What about this story? What about, their lifestyle? What about the decisions this person made? We're so quick to, try to figure out, okay, love. That makes sense. I'll put it on a t-shirt. I'll wear it. I'm good with it. But then, okay, let me find a box that I can put it in so that I don't ever have to step outside those lines. So we're so quick, our minds go immediately to that front because you're bad people. And I'm bad too. But before we get too far down that road, let me go ahead and tell you what acceptance is not, okay? Acceptance does not mean agreement. Okay? I don't know if we've ever lived in a day and age where people are so disagreeable. It is the cool thing to be disagreeable over nothing and over everything. And then not only are we disagreeable, but then we say, well, I can't accept you if I don't agree with you. Well, crap, I don't even agree with myself all the time. Like, I can say something yesterday and be like, nah, I don't believe that anymore. I don't feel that way anymore. Like, that was a lie. Like, whoever said that was dumb. I don't even agree with myself. But acceptance doesn't require full 100% agreement. Acceptance doesn't say, well, I can only accept you if we're 100% the same people. Or if we have 100% the same ideology or the same belief system or the same worldview or the same experiences. But that's not acceptance. Acceptance is not agreement. So don't kid yourself when you think, okay, well, if I don't agree with someone, if I don't agree with their choices or their attitudes or their beliefs or lifestyle, then I can't accept them. Because that's not acceptance. Okay? Second thing, acceptance does not lack accountability or does not equal a lack of accountability. Okay? Just because you hold someone accountable doesn't mean you did not accept them. And just because you accept someone doesn't mean you don't hold them accountable. Okay? Now, there's ways to go into that, and there's ways to talk about all that. But on the surface, what you need to know is that acceptance does not mean a lack of accountability. So good. Okay? And then lastly, acceptance does not mean avoidance. Great. I don't know how many of you know this, but I grew up Baptist, which is why all those had A's. Subtle points for alliteration. Acceptance does not mean avoidance. It's for the people watching online. I think sometimes we think like, okay, well, I've just got acceptance, so I'll just sweep it under the rug. I'll just let it slide, or I'll let it go, or again, that's not the way it works. And that's not what it means. We have kind of these misnomers or these misunderstandings of what acceptance is or what acceptance isn't. But again, this isn't a message about what acceptance is not. This is a message about what acceptance is and why it matters. So let's talk about that. Let's move into that, and then we'll kind of pick up the pace a little bit. Because once you see that Jesus started in the place of acceptance, you have to ask yourself this question. Why did Jesus accept those people, the sinful people, and not the religious people? Because on the surface, the religious people had everything Jesus was trying to do. I mean, they had a sincere faith with God. They were pursuing God to the best of their understanding, and they were so genuine about their pursuit of God that they were willing to set up all these boundaries and safeguards to keep them from doing anything that may detract them or may disturb them or move them away from being close in proximity to God. So they were genuine. Now they may have gone about it in a very unhealthy way, but they were still genuine. They still had faith in God. They still understood who God was and the heart of who God was. So why did Jesus not do that? And I think, to answer that question, you got to go back to verse 17. Healthy people don't need a doctor, Jesus said. Sick people do. I've come to call not those who think they are righteous, but those who know they are sinners. Not those who think, but those who know. See, verse 17 shares the reason why, because sinners and the sick knew they had a need. And they knew, more importantly, who they needed. Sick people know, I need a doctor. I can't remain sick for the rest of my life. These sinners knew, hey, I need help. I need a greater power. I need a greater being. I need a superlative figure in my life if I'm ever going to overcome this sinfulness that I'm struggling with day in and day out. Yeah. And they knew that in order to get what they needed, they would have to offer what they had. Yeah. In order to get what they needed, they would have to offer what they had, because here's the thing. You can't accept what's not being offered. Right. You can't accept a gift that I'm not willing to give you. That's good. You can't accept, no matter how much you want to, no matter how much you desire to, you can't receive something that I don't let go of. And so when it comes to acceptance, and when it comes to these particular group of people, they understood we have a need and we have something to offer, and what we have to offer, it may not be great. It may be broken, it may be busted up, it may be messed up, it may be sinful, it may be wrong, it may be betrayal, it may be shady, all these different things. But man, Jesus, at least we can offer it to you. Yeah. Where the religious people, on the other hand, they had nothing to offer because they felt like they had nothing they needed. They were righteous. They knew the law. They did it. They had everything together. So why offer something that you don't, in exchange for something you don't need? So Jesus knew this were the people he could hang out with because he could accept what they were willing to offer. And in the process of accepting what they were willing to offer, he could lead them to a point of transformation and down a journey where not only would they be transformed for the sake of transformation or for the sake of change, but for the sake of being and feeling loved. And acceptance became that path. Acceptance became that door in which they could walk. And herein lies the difference, that they were accepted by Jesus because they offered themselves to Jesus. And the reason you and I have found acceptance with Jesus is because we've done the same. When you came to Jesus, if you've come to Jesus, if you have a relationship with Jesus, you came to him and said, Jesus, this is what I've got. It ain't pretty. I got my dad bod going, but you'll just have to take it as it is. This is the best I've got, Jesus. I want abs, but I love Oreos, and I can't do anything about it, and so this is what you get. And Jesus said, okay, I'll take it. I'll settle on your dad bod. I'll settle on your sinfulness. I'll recognize that there's some things you're not proud of. I'll see that, and I'll raise you with love. I'll see your offering, and I'll give you my acceptance. I see your hurt, and I'll trade you my healing. I see your pain, and I'll bring you my restoration. I see your faults, and I see your failures, and I see your shortcomings, and said, don't worry, I already took care of it. I've already won. And so this is what I've got for you here. Are you willing to offer? Let's play a game of bigger and better, because what I've got is so much bigger and so much better. All you've got to do is just offer what you have. And then you and I made that decision, and we said, yes, Jesus, here is what I have to offer. And Jesus said, okay, great. Find my acceptance, find my love, find my fulfillment, and find my joy, because what I'm giving you is so much better than what you've offered me. But then we lose it. It's like, oh, they're too messed up. I've tried. They won't change. They believe different than me. They're scum. And she's like, no. Like, remember yourself. Remember what you offered. Remember what you came back to. Man, I don't know if you've ever felt like you're the only person in the world who understands you or who accepts you, and you feel like, why does no one else get this? It is literally the loneliest place you could ever be. But for some reason, we're so quick to put people in that place, to separate ourselves and isolate them from us. And this is why acceptance matters. Because Jesus recognized, listen, these are the people that I'm going to be with. Yeah, you got that religious crowd over there. That's fine. You can chill with them. But I'll let these people kick it with me because they're willing to offer what I have. And so the question comes back to you, which kind are you? Which kind are you? Because you know what sick people do when they find healing? They point other sick people to the place of healing. More importantly, to the person of healing. That's how we know about hospitals. Right? Like, someone got healed, they're like, hey man, you got to go over there. Like, you got to go to this place because they can fix you. They can love you, they can take you in, they can treat you right, they can make you walk out of that place a new person. But then you get this other group over here, it's like, nah, I'm good. I don't need that over there. I don't need to understand that, to empathize over there. I don't need to like commit to that over there. And I definitely don't want them hanging out with me. It's not just about me going over there, it's about them coming to me. So which kind are you? Which will you be? The person that says, yeah, like I just offered Jesus what I had and he took me in as I was. And because I found healing, because I found hope, because I found restoration, because I found acceptance, because I found love, I've got to point other people back to this person. Or are you the person over here who says, nah, I'm good, I don't need that. And because you don't need it, you don't understand why somebody else might. And when I think of our church, when I think about moving forward, we will always, always, always do our best to accept whoever comes before us, whoever comes before God and offers what they have, offers who they are, no matter how messed up, no matter how jacked up, no matter how sinful, no matter how disreputable, no matter how like it just feels kind of filthy, no matter how far that person feels, if they come and they say, this is what I have to offer. So long as I'm in charge, or so long as we're running this place, my wife and I, and we're leading the charge, we're going to do our best to accept them as they are. We're going to do our best to bring them in above all else, because listen, that's what Jesus did with me. That's what Jesus does with you. You see, race doesn't matter. Social political status doesn't matter. Orientation, sexual orientation doesn't matter. Political affiliation doesn't matter. None of these things matter when it comes to the fact that we've been called and demonstrated. Jesus has shown us a path of acceptance. None of those things Jesus said, hey, you can't accept them anymore. You can't welcome them in. None of that stuff matters to showing the love and acceptance that Jesus showed you and offering it and extending it to somebody beyond yourself. So as long as a person comes and says, hey, this is what I can offer, when they offer it, we've been given the key to accept it. And so long as they come offering, we will choose to accept. And had Jesus not done that for us, we wouldn't even be here today. So for our church, for our community, for our people, for our identity, for who we become, above all else, we will choose to love, we will choose to accept, because that's what Jesus did.